Hey, read Genesis 10. Thank you. I never read it before. I never read it before. I'm only an Orthodox Jew who reads the entire Torah from beginning to end, cover to cover, every single year. So, Genesis 10. You don't say. Moron. Somebody's commenting in the YouTube chat, Job 30v30, my skin is black. Here's another one. Amos 9 verse 7, Israel, black Hebrew nation. Everybody is somewhat familiar with the concept of the black Hebrew Israelites, people of African descent who claim to be the true descendants of Israel. Now, to be honest with you, it's very likely, given that the 10 lost tribes were exiled to many far corners of the earth, that there are far off tribes that are descendants of Israelites. First of all, we know the Ethiopian Falashas are purported to be the tribe of Dan. It's somewhat controversial, but many accept that. That's first of all. Second of all, there is famously the Lemba tribe, which, if anyone knows about DNA studies, there was a revolution in DNA studies surrounding what's called the CMH. The CMH is the Cohen modal haplotype. And here's the concept of the Cohen modal haplotype. We have an oral tradition among the Jews that there are people who self-identify as Kohanim. Kohanim are Jewish priests, so to speak, that claim lineage along the patrilineal line, father after son after father, from Aaron, the high priest Aaron, the brother of Moses. So there were a group of geneticists who kind of independently had this light bulb, one fellow in Israel and one fellow in the University of Arizona, I don't remember the names offhand, that if this oral tradition is to be taken seriously, we should be able to detect in the DNA a similarity that would point to common ancestry. So they decided to test it, and they brought together self-identified Jewish Kohanim from communities around the world. And they've collaborated with each other, the geneticist in Israel and the one in the United States, from communities around the world, Ashkenazi Jews of Eastern European descent, Sephardic Jews of Middle Eastern, North African, Iberian descent, Yemenite Jews, etc., etc. And they took these Kohanim from the different communities and they analyzed their DNA. And lo and behold, what would you know? That in over 90% of self-identified Kohanim, they found a common gene marker that was specific to this group. And they determined that all of these people were descended from one male ancestor. And based on however they figured out how many generations, the timing puts it in the period that we would claim that Aaron would have lived. So while they can't confirm scientifically with certitude that it was Aaron, we don't know, it doesn't come with a name tag, there was somebody who all these guys descended from. And so this was known as the Cohen modal haplotype. They identified a specific patrilineal gene that exists in Kohanim. Now that's interesting. So first of all, the idea, let's just get it out of the way. The idea that today's Jews, the people who identify today as the Jewish people, are not the same as the people of Israel in the Bible is ridiculous, is anti-scientific, it's anti-historical, it's anti-anthropological, it's anti-archaeological, it's anti every shred of common sense on earth, number one. But, right, number two is we have the confirmation from the Kohanim within the community that we're all related. All the Jewish communities throughout the world are related, and we even have preserved with almost complete accuracy the oral tradition of who is a Kohen and who is not. Now, that's incredible. This blew the roof off of genetic studies, okay? Now, right, this guy, Ashkenazi Jews are Khazars, not Jews. So ignorant. My friend, get an education. My friend, you have been lied to. My friend, if you live your life based on what you just commented in my YouTube channel, your life is a lie. That has been thoroughly and totally debunked. It is completely and utterly not true. So it is a line that is put forward by anti-Semites. It is totally, thoroughly debunked. And if you believe in that, then that more or less stands to measure the value of the rest of the things you believe to be true. Go do your homework, okay? I just made the point. Okay, that's step one. The Jews today are the descendants of the people of Israel, without question. Now, what about African tribes? Is it possible that African tribes are also descended from the original Israelites? And the answer is, of course. Meaning, I already told you that there were numerous tribes that were exiled throughout the world, including to Africa. We already have the Ethiopian Falashas that are accepted by many to be of the lost tribes. So no one's even disputing that. But on top of that, we have the Lemba tribe. The Lemba tribe are a tribe of African people where 50% of the males in the Lemba tribe have the CMH, the Cohen modal haplotype. So it is certain that the Lembas descend not just from Jews. I would say Jew, I don't mean necessarily the tribe of Judah. I'm using it colloquially as Israelites. But it seems very specifically from Jewish priests, right? And yet their skin looks very different than mine, and that's totally fine and good. There's no skin color is a very it's a very elastic human feature. Humans have been changing skin color throughout history, and just if you look at the Jewish communities around the world, you go to Yemen and you see the Yemenites are extremely dark, almost like an African brown complexion. The Sephardic communities have a more of an olive complexion. The Ashkenazi communities have more of a light-skinned, somewhat Caucasian complexion. Doesn't change the fact that we are descended from a single nation, but of course, over the generations, there has been intermixture with other peoples, other populations. And by the way, there's a lot of variety within our genes that never get expressed until certain environmental conditions cause these dormant genes to become expressed. And this is an area of genetics that's only become more known recently. It's called epigenetics. Epigenetics means outside of the genome, where we used to think everything was determined by the genes. So what you see is what you get. As it turns out, our DNA contains a lot more information than is coding for our physical features. And what is that stuff doing there? So for many years, they thought this was what they called junk DNA. Junk DNA means the evolutionists believe that over the course of the billions of years of the evolution of biology on Earth, we changed form so many times that some of the old DNA from our ancestor species became unusable, but it keeps getting replicated as we create more offspring. It just doesn't get used. It sort of sits there as like dead weight dragging along on the DNA chain. And they looked at this non-coding DNA as basically proof of evolution, because why else would it be there? It's not doing anything. So as it turns out, this has also been debunked, that what they used to call junk DNA is actually quite useful. It's just that it becomes useful in certain situations, and then something outside of the gene, epigenetic, this guy. Okay, what can I tell you? You're ignorant. Go away now. Get an education. So the something epigenetic outside of the genome switches on, tells these genes that have been dormant and uncoding to switch on and start coding, and then you'll have offspring with features that were not present, maybe even for many generations, that we could identify. I'll give you a few examples, a few famous examples of this. One example was in an experiment they did with mice. What did they do? They put a mouse in like one of these contraptions with strawberries that were hooked up to electrodes. And when the mouse would try to eat the strawberry, it would get an electric shock. After a while, the mouse stopped trying to eat the strawberry because it learned that you get an electric shock from that. Okay, but it didn't do that before. It learned it. Then the mouse reproduced, and the children of this mouse were put in a similar contraption, and they would not go near the strawberry. They were repelled by the smell of the strawberry. It repelled them naturally, instinctively. The parent didn't have this instinct, and the offspring had this instinct. How is that? So the experience of the parent activated a gene that was dormant in its DNA, so that when it produced offspring with an active gene that was repelled by strawberry scent, and instinctively the offspring didn't go to the strawberry, something that was not present in the active genes of the parent. Here's another experiment. There's an experiment done with fruit flies. Okay, they took two populations of fruit flies, and in one population they introduced a virus, and in the other population they did not introduce a virus. Okay, they let the fruit flies, these two populations in isolation, reproduce, and then they examined the DNA of the offspring, and this is what they found. In the population where they did not introduce the virus, there's a virus that was harmful to the fruit flies. The offspring had very little variation in their genes. They were almost identical to the parents, okay, and to each other. Very little variation in the genes. In the population where they introduced the virus, the offspring had extreme variation in their DNA from each other and from the parents. How so? How did this happen? The fact that the parents were infected with a virus somehow told something, and I don't know that they've identified what the something is, told the genes when the offspring were produced to mix up more, mix up the genes more, because they needed to produce an offspring variety that would be resistant to the virus. As we know how immunity works, when you have a population, some people are genetically prone to certain things, and some elements of the population are not. So you could have a disease that affects some people and not others because they have a natural immunity. So what happens? The ones who are affected tend to dwindle in the population, and the ones that are not affected tend to increase in the population, and so the immunity will spread throughout the next generation and avoid that problem going forward. So that's what was somehow being done. Now, fruit flies are not intelligent and they can't manipulate their genes consciously. So this was happening somehow at some deep level. Something was instructing the genes to mix up in a way that may produce a variety of offspring that would be resistant to the virus. It was clear that something was directing this population to create more variety so that they would produce a resistance in the offspring. But the population that was not threatened by a virus, that did not happen. So there was epigenetics, something outside of the genes manipulating the genes. Third and final example, cloning cats. So we haven't heard so much about cloning lately, but they're still cloning. They're still cloning animals. So they took like an orange cat or something like that, and they cloned it. So what is a clone? They took literally the cat's DNA out of its cells, put it into an egg cell that was stripped of DNA, so it had none of its own genetic material, and incubated it, maybe through a surrogate mother cat, however it is. But the genes of this new cat were the identical genes taken straight out of another cat. The cat that it was taken from was orange. The cat that was cloned was gray. How's that happen? How's that happen? If the genes are genes for orange hair, it has orange hair. The clone will also have orange hair. How did it get gray hair? So what did they discover? They discovered that this guy is so ignorant. It's unbelievable. I'm going to respond to him in a moment. Genesis 10, 1-5. It just exposes how little anybody knows. Okay, I'll respond to that in a minute. Okay, so what did they discover? They discovered that every cat is carrying the genes, and I don't mean carrying like recessive and dominant, because that would be the same in the clone also. But it may be carrying several dominant genes for different colors, but only one of those genes is activated, and so that becomes the color of the hair, and the other ones are dormant. But something epigenetic, something outside of the gene, instructs the gene, this color should turn on. And we don't know what it is. So that in a clone, in a clone of the orange cat, you get a gray cat, because something epigenetic told the genes of that cat, instead of turning on the orange, turn on the gray. Turns out it has orange and gray. So where am I going with this? Biological organisms are carrying DNA to code for many more varieties than are active in us right now. But depending on environmental factors, this epigenetic factor that they may not have identified will tell our genes to switch on and off for the offspring. So when you have people who have dark skin that move to a climate area where the dark skin is not needed, or maybe is less adaptable, they may be carrying a gene for light skin that becomes activated, and the generations will become lighter. And vice versa, when they go to an area that's hotter with more sun, the generations may become darker, not because necessarily of genetic interbreeding, which is possible, but we don't know how much we're carrying inside of us that could get turned on generationally based on environmental epigenetic factors. We just don't know. So it's not a valid point to make to say, oh, you have light skin like European, indigenous European people, so you can't be indigenous to the Middle East. And yet somehow it's okay to say that a person with very dark skin, like an African complexion, is somehow they are yet indigenous to the Middle East, where people don't have that complexion. It's completely ridiculous. Anyway, I want to respond to this comment of Genesis 10, 1-5. So what is that? It's the genealogy in Noah, the genealogy of his children. And it says that Ashkenaz, this is what he's going for. Ashkenaz is a descendant of Japheth. So therefore, Ashkenaz is not a descendant of Shem. So the Ashkenazi Jews can't be Semites. They can't be from Shem. They can't be from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are not of the line of Japheth, because they're Ashkenazi Jews. And Ashkenaz, it says in the Bible, is from Japheth. So how idiotic is this comment? The reason Ashkenazi Jews are called Ashkenazi Jews is because they migrated to the lands of Ashkenaz. We're not descended from Ashkenaz, you moron. We we migrated to the lands of Ashkenaz. And so the Jewish communities in the lands of Ashkenaz, which are the European countries, were known as the Ashkenaz in Hebrew, based on the biblical identification of this group where we lived among them, that we were the Jewish communities of Ashkenaz. So we're the Ashkenazi Jews. We're not descended from Ashkenaz, you dolt. How ignorant are you? Go get an education. Some people are beyond help. It's just these people have no education and they believe total stupidity. And I pity these people. And whoever you are, okay, read Genesis 10. Thank you. I never read it before. I never read it before. I'm only an Orthodox Jew who reads the entire Torah from beginning to end, cover to cover, every single year. So, Genesis 10, you don't say. Moron. I feel bad for this guy. I don't know you personally. Maybe you're nice. Maybe you mean well. Maybe you want to do the right thing. But you've been fed a bunch of baloney. And you believe it, and you're living your life based on it, and you're coming to my YouTube channel and making ignorant, uneducated comments that expose how much your brain has been infected with the stupidity that you're being fed and you're lapping up. Why don't you do yourself a favor and do the world a favor and improve your life by learning the truth and start behaving better? How about that? This is all we get. Read Genesis 10. Genesis 10, Ashkenazi Jews of the descendant of Japheth. So idiotic. And by the way, and the genetic studies totally debunk all of this. The Ashkenazi Jews are descended from the Middle East. It's been demonstrated by the genetic studies that I referenced before. All Jewish communities throughout the world are descended from the Middle East. There's no question about it. The exception is, at least the last time I read something on the topic, which I have to admit was many years ago, so the research may have yielded something new. Ironically, the Ethiopian Jewish population is not does not have similar DNA to the other Jewish populations of the world, which does raise questions as to whether they actually do have a similar origin or not. Maybe there's been more research on that subject, but from what I read on it, there was a big question mark there of their origins. But there was no question mark on Ashkenazi Jewry vis-a-vis Sephardic Jewry, Yemenite Jewry, etc. So the people who are running around with Genesis 10 and Khazars, we're Gentile Edomites, we're Khazars, right? What are the Khazars? The Khazars were an Eastern European kingdom that converted to Judaism in the early Middle Ages. And that's a fact. That's a fact that they were completely unrelated to Jews. They were a Slavic people. This was a Slavic nation that were pagans, and the king decided to choose among the major religions, and we don't really know the origins of how they became Jewish. There's a legend about how they became Jewish. This isn't necessarily confirmed by historical evidence, but we know that there was such a kingdom because we have records, we have letters, and we have communication and records of business dealings, etc. We know there was a Jewish kingdom of a Slavic nation called the Khazars. The legend has it that the king of the Khazars had a debate between Christian a Christian theologian, a Muslim theologian, and a Jewish Torah scholar, and he was swayed by the Jewish presentation of the evidence of why they have the truthful faith, and he converted along with much of his kingdom. So there's a theory that the Ashkenazi Jews are not authentic descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but rather they're descendants of the Khazars who migrated to the rest of Europe and became the Ashkenazi Jewish populations. This has been thoroughly debunked on many, many levels. There's just no evidence. It's not that there's no evidence to this. Not just that there's no evidence to this. All the evidence is contrary to this. That was a theory that was cooked up in the 19th century by a Jew, ironically, but he was wrong. He was wrong. He was proven wrong, but it didn't stop the anti-Semites from picking it up and running with it. And by the way, it wouldn't make a difference, because even if we were converts, which there certainly are converts throughout the history of the Jewish nation that have mixed in, and we welcome converts, and we embrace. The Torah tells us to love the convert. It wouldn't make a difference to our Jewishness, because since the Torah tells us that a person who converts to Judaism is equal to a natural born Israelite, then once someone is a convert, who cares what his genealogy is? Doesn't matter. It doesn't give him less claim to the heritage of the Jewish people once he joins them through conversion. So at least under God's law, so that's the one that counts. So who cares? Even if we were Khazars, if we're Jews, we're Jews. But the bottom line is we're not Khazars, because that's been totally disproven. It was a Johnny-come-lately theory that was completely disproven. So people who still run around with the Khazar thing show two things. Number one, they're anti-Semitic, because it's the only people who peddle this because they have an agenda to delegitimize Jews. And two, they're ignorant because they don't know how stupid they sound. My friend, do better for yourself. Do better for yourself. Go do your homework.